John Halsey never thought that his life could change overnight. An ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that changed everything. He returned from work late, as always, tired and annoyed after a long day at the office. He usually walked along a busy road lined with houses with soft yellow window lights. Something has changed today. The street seemed deserted. A cold wind crept under his jacket, and the lights were dimmed. He didn't want to think about it, but the feeling of something sinister haunted him at every step. The phone went dead, and John felt isolated. At that moment, he saw that there was a car in front of him. Not his car, he was sure of it. She was standing on the same curb where his old SUV usually parked, but this time a dark sedan took over, with the windows closed and the headlights off. John stopped, looking at the car. There was nothing to be seen inside, no movement, no light. He felt strangely uneasy. Looking around, he noticed that the other cars parked on the streets were just as lifeless. No one left the houses, no one was driving on the road. It's like the whole world is frozen. Deciding not to approach the sedan, John walked on, accelerating his pace. His house was 3 blocks away, but every step was difficult. When he finally saw his building, relief washed over him. The house seemed the same as always, with the lights dimmed from the inside. John reached for the keys, but stopped. The sound of footsteps came from behind him. A nervous tick jerked his hand, causing him to drop the keys. Looking over his shoulder, he saw no one. Silence enveloped the street. He quickly picked up the keys and ran into the house, closing the door behind him. After locking the door, John heard his home phone vibrate. It seemed strange to him. No one used landlines these days. When he picked up the phone, he heard heavy breathing. "You're still here," said a rough, hoarse voice. "We're behind you." The pipe fell to the floor with a crash. John froze in place, feeling his body go cold. His breathing quickened, and he realized that something had changed in the house. He usually knew every sound, every creak of his house, but this time it felt like he was in a strange place. Gradually, the tension increased. He slowly began to look around the rooms. There was silence in every room, but it felt like he was being watched. The barely audible footsteps on the second floor confused him. Time passed, but his mind refused to accept the fact that someone or something could be upstairs. After climbing the stairs, John paused at the door to his bedroom. A faint light penetrated through the crack, but it did not give a sense of security. The hand on the door handle was shaking. He slowly pushed the door open, and it opened with a soft creak. But the room was empty. Feeling stupid for being paranoid, John sat down on the bed. But something remained wrong. He heard the whispers again. At first it was quiet, barely perceptible, and then it became louder. It was the same voice he had heard on the phone. "You're still here." John was sitting on the edge of the bed, his heart beating like a hammer. The voice he had just heard faded into the silence as if it had never existed. The room looked completely normal. Everything was in its place. A chair near the window, a closet, the bathroom door slightly ajar. But his mind was in chaos. Who could have called? How could this voice appear and disappear so quickly? And what did those words mean? "You're still here?" Deciding that this was probably just a figment of his imagination after a long day at work, John got up and went to the window. There was still the same empty street outside the window. His gaze fell on the very car that was parked outside his house when he first returned. But now something has changed. The headlights of the car were on. Bright light was shining directly into his window, flooding the room with an ominous light. It was wrong. The headlights had been turned off before. Someone in that car was watching him. John felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He wanted to close the curtains, but he couldn't bring himself to take his eyes off the car. Something moved inside the car. The man who had been sitting motionless before began to slowly turn his head towards the house. John couldn't make out the face, just the outline of the head. The movement was slow, as if the man inside the car was deliberately stalling for time. Suddenly, the headlights of the car blinked, and everything was plunged into darkness. The car disappeared, as if it had never existed. John took a sharp step back, losing his balance and almost falling. At the same moment, a strange sound came from the hallway. It was something between a creak and a rustle, as if someone was dragging a metal object across the floor. John turned abruptly and walked to the bedroom door. He tried to convince himself that all these were random sounds, that his imagination was just playing out. But the closer he got to the corridor, the more distinct the sound became. The metal was still creaking, now right outside the door. John froze at the threshold, not daring to open the door. His hand was already reaching for the handle when suddenly the lights in the house flickered and went out. The darkness fell on him like an ink stain. Only the moonlight from the window allowed him to see anything. He was breathing heavily, listening to the silence. "It's just a power outage," he whispered to himself, trying to calm down. "Just an old wiring." But as soon as he said that, the sound outside the door came again, louder and closer. I could hear something heavy moving on the floor, and then the sound suddenly stopped. Unable to withstand the tension, John abruptly opened the door. The hallway was empty, but there was something metallic on the floor in front of him. He looked down and saw a hammer. It was his hammer, which was usually kept in the garage. How did he end up here in his bedroom? Who brought it? John quickly closed the door and stepped back. A strange feeling of helplessness gripped him. He was locked in his own house, but something or someone was here, next to him, playing with his mind. Deciding that he needed to check the whole house, John grabbed the phone again and turned on the flashlight. The feeling of paranoia grew stronger with every step. He went downstairs, inspecting every room along the way. There was nothing unusual in the kitchen and living room. But as he approached the basement door, he felt that the air had become thick, as if something was hiding below. John stopped at the basement door. It was bolted, but there was a faint, flickering light coming from under the door. Maybe it's just a light bulb flashing, he thought. But who turned on the light in the basement? John was pretty sure he hadn't turned it on. He slowly opened the door and shone his flashlight down the stairs. The basement was the same as always. Old boxes, racks of tools, a bunch of unnecessary things. But something has changed. There was a TV set in the corner, next to the shelves. It was an old TV that he had thrown away a long time ago. John was sure he was gone. And yet he stood there, flickering with static noise. John took a few steps down, but suddenly the TV went out and the basement was plunged into darkness again. Only the sound of his footsteps echoed through the room. He froze, feeling that something was watching him, and it wasn't imagination. At that moment, the door on the second floor slammed shut. The sound was so loud that John almost dropped the flashlight. It became so quiet in the basement that the air seemed to freeze. John abruptly turned around and ran back upstairs. One thought was beating in my head. Someone is here. I have to get out. When he reached the hallway, he noticed that the front door was ajar. It was impossible. He had definitely closed it when he entered. He approached the door cautiously, his hands trembling. Opening it wider, he looked out. The street was empty, but the feeling that he was being watched did not disappear. Suddenly, something moved in the shadows. Without hesitation, John ran outside and ran away from the house. Every second seemed like an eternity. John was running so fast that his breath was coming in short gasps and his heart was pounding in his chest like crazy. He did not look back, but he felt that something was following him. His feet carried him through the empty streets, and the cool night air hit him in the face. The city was sleeping, oblivious to his desperate escape. The lights of the nearest store flashed in the distance, and John aimed there. He needed to be among people, somewhere safe. When he reached the door of the convenience store, he ran inside, panting. Fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating shelves crammed with groceries, as if nothing was happening here. A couple of people moved slowly between the rows, ignoring his worried look. John grabbed the nearest shelf, trying to catch his breath and get his thoughts in order. He didn't understand what was going on, and most importantly, what he should do next. At the exit, a security guard, a woman in her 40s, stood at the cash register, leafing through a magazine in a bored manner. John decided to turn to her, hoping for at least some help. He came closer and stammered and began to speak. "I'm sorry. Can I talk to you for a minute? I think someone is watching me. It can be dangerous." The woman, slightly surprised by his appearance and strange statement, raised her eyebrows, but immediately replied, "Yes, of course. Let's call the police if it's serious." John nodded, feeling the fear slowly let go. But as soon as he relaxed, a strange sound came from behind him, like a soft scrape of metal on metal. He turned around abruptly, but there was nothing suspicious in the store. Ordinary customers. But the sound was too familiar. The guard, noticing his reaction, cautiously came closer. "What happened? Everything is fine?" John took a step back, his eyes widened, and he muttered softly, "This is it. I heard that sound at home." The woman did not have time to answer, when suddenly the lamps in the store flickered. The flickering light was confusing. Suddenly, the entire store was plunged into darkness, leaving John and the others in complete silence. "What the hell is this?" the guard muttered, taking a flashlight out of her pocket. John heard that sound again, a metallic rustle, very close now. His hands trembled, and he didn't know what to do. He grabbed the woman's hand, his voice was full of despair. "You don't understand. It's here. We have to get out of here." The woman wanted to say something, but suddenly there was a loud bang at the door of the store. First once, then again. The impact was so strong that the glass shook. The guard's lantern illuminated the doors, but nothing could be seen behind them. Emptiness. However, the sound did not stop. "This can't be happening," John muttered, feeling his legs go wobbly. "Someone is breaking in." The woman pushed him away and headed for the door. "I'm going to see what's going on there." But as soon as she got closer, the sound disappeared. The store was plunged into an oppressive silence. John could only hear his own heavy breathing and the thudding of his heart, but the silence was only for a moment. There was a loud crack as the store's doors shattered into splinters. The guard, without having time to react, was thrown back, and John only saw for a moment how her body fell lifelessly to the floor. There was no one in the doorway, only darkness, endless and thick, filled the space. He knew he had to run, but his legs refused to move. Numb with horror, John could only stare at the broken door. "There is one thought in my head. What kind of power is this? Why did this happen to him?" "You're still here," the voice whispered. The same voice he had heard in the bedroom, but now he was very close, as if he was whispering right in my ear. John whirled around, his eyes darting through the darkness, but there was no one there. Only silence, only emptiness. He started moving again. His body suddenly started moving. Running, hiding, all he knew was that he had to get out. Running out into the street, John didn't even look back. John ran blindly, his feet barely touching the ground. He didn't look back, didn't try to figure out exactly what was going on. His heart was pounding in his chest, his thoughts were rushing to the sides, but one idea was firmly rooted in his mind. He had to run away, anywhere, just not stop. The emptiness stretched around him. The city seemed to be frozen. No cars, no people, no sounds. Only dim lights in the distance hinted at the presence of life. But with each step, this feeling became weaker. Something was driving him forward. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an old gas station appeared in front of him, which John had once seen at the entrance to the city. The building looked abandoned, peeling paint, broken windows, rusty structures, and inside darkness and abandonment. But even this gloomy shelter seemed safer to him than the open street. John rushed inside, slamming the door behind him and trying not to make any noise. He froze, listening, waiting for footsteps, screams, or that metallic rustle that had haunted him all night. But it was quiet. The silence was thick, enveloping, as if everything had stopped. John's gaze darted to the old shelves. Empty bottles, dried dirt, and remnants of a once-existing life were scattered everywhere. The light above the cash register, barely alive, blinked, and for the first time he felt at least a little safe. "I'm safe here, they won't find me here," he repeated to himself, trying to convince his mind of this. But a moment later, reality came flooding back. Someone has been here in this building for a long time. Next to the cash register, on the floor, John saw an old cardboard box. Inside it were things, neatly folded, but clearly long forgotten. An old leather folder with documents stood out among the clothes and other junk. John automatically reached for it, opened it, and found yellowed sheets of paper inside. He didn't know why he started reading, but he couldn't stop. The documents seemed official, some bills, notes, but one letter caught his attention. "We couldn't find anything. They disappeared, completely gone. We don't know who or what is behind this. We have studied the entire building, every corner, but there is no answer. Traces, the tracks are gone. The signature was missing." John felt cold sweat trickle down his back. He slowly lowered the paper and looked around the room. This document was left here for a reason. Whoever wrote it knew something. He began to look around more closely. In the corner of the room, I noticed a door that led to the back of the building. His feet went there of their own accord. He tried to walk quietly, but every step he took on the creaking floor seemed deafening. A door with a small window led into a narrow corridor where there was almost no light. The smell of damp and mildew hit my nose. The walls were peeling off, and it seemed that they were about to collapse. John stopped, trying to decide whether to go on or go back, but something inside was pushing him forward. The corridor led him into a small room. It was an old warehouse, littered with boxes, shelves, and trash. But there was a leather jacket on the floor, right in the middle of the room. She looked like she had just been left here. Not dusty, not time-worn like the rest. There was a paper bag next to her, and something moved inside. John took a step back, his heart paused for a moment. He bent down and carefully unwrapped the package. There were photos inside, but not ordinary photos. They were pictures of streets, houses, his house. On one of them, he was himself on the day he returned from work. Panic surged with renewed force. John began frantically sorting through the rest of the pictures. They were made on different days, at different times, but always with the same purpose: to keep an eye on him. Someone had been watching him for weeks, maybe months. He never noticed it. And then his gaze stopped at the last photo. It was him, at the very gas station where he was now. The photo was taken outside, through the window. John froze. In the background, he saw something that took his breath away. There was someone standing in the shadows behind him. With shaking hands, he slowly turned his gaze to that very window. The room was empty. But after a moment, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he realized that someone was standing right behind the glass, watching him. At that moment, John felt his whole body go cold. He no longer felt safe. These photos were proof of something terrible, and now he's become a part of it. He took a step towards the door, but he already knew it was useless. The click of the lock pierced the silence, and the door slowly closed behind him.